Welcome to Time. In this video, we are going to be discussing the CUET UG's 2024 analysis for the general test, that is the third section. Now, before we dive into it, let us look at the overall CUET UG pattern. So the CUET UG 2024 is a national level entrance exam and it is conducted for the admission to all UG programs of all central universities in India. Now this exam is conducted by the National Testing Agency. Now if you see students, it is conducted in a hybrid mode. You get to select if you want to attempt the paper based where you bubble OMR sheets, or you can opt for the computer based test, whichever is comfortable for you. Now the CUET UG exam dates are between the 15th of May and the 24th of May, and in this video we are going to be talking about the general test part. But before we understand the general test, let's look at the overall sections that appear in this exam. So the CUET UG 2024 exam is conducted with three sections in mind. Now the first section is the language section where you might see the English paper appearing. Now in this section you have 40 questions that you have to answer out of the 50 questions that are given in the paper, and it's a 45-minute test. Okay. Now if you go to the second section, here is where you get to answer 40 out of 50 questions that are given, and these are based on the domain subject that you are aiming to take in your undergraduate program. Now currently you have around 29 subjects that you can pick from, and this test will be for around 60 minutes. Okay students, now the section 3 is what we are going to be focusing on in this particular video, where you have the general test. Now this general test is comprising of totally 60 questions, out of which you will have to answer 50 questions, and this is a 60-minute duration test. Now before we even move on into the general test, let's also understand what are the different testing areas in each of these sections. So if you look at the section 1, your language testing area comprises of reading comprehension based on different passages that you will get. Then you also will be asked questions based on the facts that are mentioned in the passage, specific detail. You also will be checked on your literary and narrative abilities. You will also be checked on your literary aptitude, your vocabulary, grammar, and overall verbal ability will be tested in this particular section. Now if you look at the second section, you will be tested on the domain subject. These will all be based on the class 12 board exam syllabus that you have already been studying for, and like I mentioned before, you have 29 subjects, out of which you can select up to 6 subjects, and you can appear for 6 subject students at the max at this particular section. Now moving on to the third section in this, you will be tested on the general test, which is what we will be talking about in this video. Now under the general test, you will be tested for your general knowledge, you will be tested for your current affairs, you will be tested for your general mental ability, or your numerical ability, quantitative reasoning, basic mathematical concepts like your arithmetic, algebra, your geometry, mensuration, statistics, all of this which are taught until grade 8 to 10, and you will also be tested on your logical and analytical reasoning. Now that we understood an overall picture of what the testing areas and the whole process of this particular exam is, let's get into the general test analysis. Okay. Now the CUET general test had a duration of about 60 minutes. The total questions that were given in the paper were 60, out of which 50 questions were expected to be attempted. Now if you attempted more than 50 questions, they will only take the first 50 questions as your attempt, and the rest of them will not be taken into the assessment. Now the marking scheme for this particular test was +5 for each correct answer and -1 for each incorrect answer. Now if you look at the area wise breakup under this section, under general awareness, you had 25 questions. Under the quantitative section, you had 17 questions, and under the reasoning section, you had 18 questions. Now let's look at each of these sections in isolation. Coming to general awareness first, students, like I said, there were a total of 25 questions, of which current affairs there were 10 questions and static GK there was 15 questions. Now under current affairs, there were questions that were related to the awards, the Padma Bhushan awards, all the Padma awards that is conferred by the president to all the people from different fields. You also had questions related to certain government schemes, etc. And overall, under the current affairs questions, the 10 current affairs questions that appeared, 6 of them were easy if you were up to date with your current affairs. 2 of them are a little moderate, you may or may not have known these answers, and there were 2 questions that were quite difficult that came from this particular section. Now if you look at static GK, there were 15 questions, and let us look at the split up for the static GK questions. You had 3 questions that appeared from geography. They were about mountain passes, they were about glaciers, etc. And these were quite difficult because in static GK it's usually you wouldn't know from which topics or which particular section they will ask. It would all depend on different aspects here, but overall the questions from the geography part were a little bit difficult. Now the second set of questions that came under the static GK were history and polity. These two were, there were 3 questions, and these also were very difficult and unexpected questions, and it all entailed about the formation of states, when was, so they gave 4 states, I think it was Haryana, there was Goa, there was Jammu and Kashmir, and there was one other state, and the question was to write the order of when the states were formed, right? So this question is something that you would, it's a very static GK question like as it is, and it's not something that you would have prepared for, but if you're good at your history and your polity of Indian, of the Indian society and our country, this question you could have answered it. So that was the difficult question from the history and polity section. You then had 3 questions from science and technology topic. These were easy. This was on the pH levels of the rivers or the oceans and how that affects global warming. There was one question on that. There was one question on deficiency related to diseases, etc. So these were the type of science and technology related questions. Now there were 7 questions that were under the miscellaneous part, out of which 2 were easy and there were 5 difficult questions. This section had questions related to who personalities are and what professions they belong to, and there was a match the following type question that had the country and the currency, and you were supposed to match 4 of them and answer that. That was one type of question. And there was one question on the handicrafts industry. So overall, because there were more static GK questions and because all of them were difficult, you can see that the overall this section was a difficult one for you, right? Now let's move on to the next section. Now the next section that we will be talking about is reasoning. There were a total of 18 questions under this section. You had 1 easy and 1 difficult questions under the number and letter series. You had 1 question under the letter analogy type questions. You had 1 medium question from the missing number and or letters in the figure type of question. You had 2 very easy coding and decoding questions. Students who are good at this, it's a very scoring area for you. as usual, blood relations is something everybody has to focus on, and there was one easy question that was scoring enough. There was one question on direction sense, there was one on clocks. All of these were quite easy to do. Then there were two questions on clocks that were on the easier side. So overall, if you look, if you would have attempted these questions, most of them were easy. If you look at the overall section also, it was quite easy. Then you had one medium question from deductions and syllogism topic. Now you also had analytical type of ranking and circular arrangement type questions. So these two are the arrangement type questions, and both of them were quite easy to do in this section. And then you had the non-verbal reasoning type of questions, where you had one grid completion, you had one paper folding type question, and you had a figure formation question. So overall, if you look at this particular section, there were 13 easy questions for you to do, and 3 medium questions for you to do, and only 2 difficult questions. So even if you would have left these two, these 5 questions, and you would have attempted 13 questions, this was a very scoring section for you to attempt. Now moving on to the quantitative ability. Under quantitative ability, you had 17 questions. So you had 2 questions on simplifications, which were easy. You had 1 question on numbers that was a little moderate. You had 2 questions related to ratio, proportion and variation types. They were easy to moderate for you to attempt. There were 2 questions from percentage profit and loss. That was also easy to moderate for you to attempt. There was 1 question from averages, mixtures and allegations. That was also easy to do. And there was 1 simple interest, compound interest type question that was easy to do. So if you look at your arithmetic section, it was an easy to do section for you, with a few moderate type of questions that appeared. Now next we see is the geometry and mensuration questions. There were 3 geometry and mensuration related questions which were also easy. So if you were good with formulas under the geometry and mensuration section, it was a good to do section. You also had 1 question from time and work and 2 questions from time and distance to do, which were more on the moderate and the easy to moderate side. So if you're good at these topics, this also would have been a doable section for you. Statistics, there was 1 question that was moderate, and there was 1 question from trigonometry that was moderate. Overall, if you look at this section, you can call it easy to moderate. So even if you just focused on your arithmetic and your geometry, it was a very scoring section for you. Statistics 1 question and trigonometry 1 question, if they are not your strongest suits, and if you would have not attempted these questions and left them in the 10 questions that you can leave out, it would have been quite a scoring section for you as quantitative ability. Now if you look at the overall analysis, it was a very doable test, and general test was quite easy. Anybody could have, any decent above average student could have done quite well in this section. For now, the cutoffs are expected to be on the higher side for colleges that are in demand, like DU and other central universities across India. But let's hope for the best students. All the best for your results, and we will meet soon. Thank you.